It's funny. Usually when you hire someone to fix, let's say your plumbing, the transaction is incredibly clear,
Oh, absolutely.
right? Like a pipe is leaking, they come over, they tighten a valve, the leak stops, you hand them a credit card and they leave. There's this inherent expectation of physical and temporal boundaries.
Right, because it's physical labor.
Exactly. You don't text your plumber at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night asking for their thoughts on your bathroom tile choices.
No, you definitely don't. It's highly visible. It's binary, really. Broken, then not broken. And everyone instinctively understands that the person's time and energy have strict limits.
But then you step into the world of knowledge work. You start consulting or running an agency or stepping out as a freelance expert, and suddenly those clean physical borders they just vanish.
They completely disappear.
Yeah, and you're looking at a working relationship that is completely undefined territory. And, you're listening to this deep dive right now because you are a learner. You know how to fix the metaphorical plumbing of your business.
Right.
You have the drive to absorb knowledge quickly, but you might be drowning in this professional boundarylessness. You want the insights without the information overload.
Which is incredibly common, honestly. When the product you are selling is your brain or, your strategy or your creativity, clients often assume they just have an all-access pass to that brain.
Yeah, an all-access pass. That's exactly what it feels like.
Right, and when boundaries are invisible, that is exactly when the profound exhaustion sets in.
Well, our mission for today's deep dive is highly specific. We are uncovering how to set those boundaries, avoid burnout, and deliver significantly better results.
Yes.
And we're going to do it using one surprisingly simple framework. The source we are pulling from today is incredibly focused. We're looking at the Client Expectations Agreement Template cheat sheet.
By James Tuckerman?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Created by James Tuckerman. Okay, let's unpack this. The ultimate premise here is that working with clients should be energizing.
Right. It shouldn't be a grind.
No, it shouldn't. But to understand why we desperately need a specific tool to manage expectations, we first have to examine the psychological reality of consulting today.
And that reality is often defined by those murky waters we just mentioned. The source text hits on these specific pain points that I think anyone in professional services will just feel in their bones.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about unclear boundaries, scope creep, where a tiny project slowly balloons into a monster.
The absolute worst.
And, poor follow-through.
Let's talk about the physical reaction to those murky waters, though, because it's visceral. Imagine it's Friday, 4:55 p.m., your laptop is half closed, you're mentally transitioning to the weekend.
I'm getting stressed just thinking about it.
Right, and your phone buzzes. It's an email from a client asking a quote-unquote quick question that actually requires, 2 hours of deep analytical thought.
And your stomach completely drops.
It drops.
Yeah.
You enter this agonizing mental debate. Do I answer this now and ruin my Friday evening? Or do I ignore it and let the anxiety of an unanswered email ruin my entire weekend?
That stomach drop, that's the physiological response to a lack of structural safety.
Structural safety, wow.
Yeah, because nothing was formally agreed upon regarding Friday afternoon communications. The burden of the boundary falls entirely on your shoulders in real time. That is a massive cognitive drain.
It's like a professional situationship.
A what?
A situationship. When you're dating someone and you have all the heavy demands, the time commitments, the emotional weight of a marriage.
Oh, right.
But absolutely none of the defined rules. You haven't had the what are we conversation.
And is it a perfect analogy?
So inevitably, because nothing is on paper, someone crosses an invisible line, feelings get hurt, and deep resentment builds. That is exactly what happens with clients when you don't define the borders up front.
It really is. And to understand the mechanism that fixes this professional situationship, we have to look closely at the mind behind it.
James Tuckerman.
Right. Tuckerman isn't just an academic theorizing about productivity. He is the co-creator of the B2B school. He has advised enterprise giants, American Express, Westpac, National Australia Bank. But he's not, a corporate suit.
Not at all. He's known specifically for taking intensely complex sales and marketing ideas and distilling them down into simple, actionable strategies. And notably, doing it without those aggressive, sleazy sales tactics.
His origin story is actually what makes this framework so robust. He made a massive splash at just 26 years old when he launched Anthill magazine.
26? That's wild.
Yeah, turning it into one of Australia's most influential business media brands. But then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and print media effectively died overnight.
Right, and he didn't just casually pivot, he had to completely transform his livelihood. He became a pioneer in digital publishing and online education years before it was the standard.
Exactly.
Today, he hosts a podcast called Super Obvious, where he unpacks business strategies that feel incredibly obvious, but only after someone points them out to you.
And this background is the key to the whole cheat sheet. Think about the profile of this person. Someone who whiteboards high-level enterprise strategies, runs highly scalable digital businesses,
Right.
survives massive industry collapses, chases after 2 young kids, and operates primarily on cafe coffee.
Sounds exhausting.
Someone navigating that level of complexity has to rely on systems thinking.
They literally do not have the bandwidth for unspoken expectations.
Exactly. Tuckerman's tool is a survival mechanism born out of the trenches of high-level B2B consulting. He is obsessed with engineering what he calls frictionless offers.
Frictionless offers.
Right. If a process requires too much back and forth or too much real-time decision-making, it doesn't scale. It breaks.
Which brings us to the actual solution he engineered. Because Tuckerman is obsessed with friction-free business. His fix to the Friday 4.55 p.m. problem is not some dense 50-page legal document filled with impenetrable jargon.
Think like.
Yeah, really, it actually requires a fundamental mindset shift about what the word agreement even means in a business context. The primary directive from the source material is explicitly this: a client expectations agreement, or CEA, is not a legal contract.
That is the pivotal shift. If you treat it like a legal contract, it becomes adversarial. Instead, it is a clarity tool.
A clarity tool.
Yes, its entire functional purpose is to set the tone, build psychological trust, and take your specific way of working, which is entirely invisible to a new client, and make it highly visible.
The source frames it with this fantastic collaborative quote. You present it to the client as, this is how we get the best out of each other.
I love that framing.
It's great. But I have to stop you here and push back a little bit.
Okay.
Because in theory, that sounds lovely.
I can hear the hesitation.
Look, the consulting market is brutal right now. If I am fighting tooth and nail to win a brand new high-paying client, and the moment they say yes, I slide a formal agreement across the table detailing my rules, doesn't that inherently put up walls?
You're worried about scaring them off.
Yes. I am terrified that I'm risking alienating them. Aren't going to look like a total diva who is more concerned with my own convenience than delivering value to them.
What's fascinating here is that our brains naturally assume that rules create friction, especially in a new relationship. But psychologically, the exact opposite is true. Clarity breeds comfort, not conflict.
I'm going to need you to unpack the psychology on that one because my instinct says a list of rules equals friction.
Okay, think of this expectations agreement like the lane lines in an Olympic swimming pool.
Okay.
If you throw a swimmer into a massive pool with no lines, what happens? They swim slower. They're constantly lifting their head, looking around, anxious that they're going to drift into someone else's space or crash into the wall.
Where they're distracted.
Exactly. The lack of structure creates anxiety. But when you put those bright, visible lane lines in the water, the swimmer can put their head down and pull as hard and as fast as they can. The restriction actually creates the freedom to perform.
Wow. That is an incredible way to look at it.
It applies perfectly to client dynamics. When a client hires you, especially if you are the perceived expert, there is a complex power dynamic at play, heavily mixed with uncertainty. They don't know your rhythms.
Wow.
They don't know if they're allowed to text you. They don't know how fast you'll reply to an email. By explicitly stating how we get the best out of each other, you are providing the lane lines.
You're removing the guesswork.
Yes, you are removing the client's latent anxiety about how to behave, replacing all that unspoken guesswork with a shared, safe framework.
So instead of the client sitting there wondering, is it rude if I ask for a revision on a Sunday? They just check the lane lines. It completely removed the emotional weight and the awkwardness from the interaction.
It neutralizes the relationship. It's just data. But to create that level of clarity, it actually put mutual respect on paper without sounding like a generic copy-pasted corporate robot. You have to know what your own lane lines are first.
Yes. You can't draw the map if you don't know the territory. And that leads us to what Tuckerman considers a mandatory, non-negotiable step, the self-audit.
The source is adamant about this in the last word section. You cannot skip the internal audit. A best practice agreement isn't something you download and just slap your logo on. It needs to authentically reflect the unique way you operate.
Let's trace the narrative of this self-audit framework because it moves from the logistical to the highly behavioral. It starts by forcing you to define the territory of your communication preferences.
Right, which is huge.
And we're not just talking about deciding between Slack or email. We are talking about managing cognitive load. You have to define your available hours, your standard response times, and your absolute rules on synchronous versus asynchronous communication.
The distinction between synchronous and asynchronous is vital. A Slack message is asynchronous. It sits in a designated digital office that you can choose to walk out of.
Right.
A text message, or worse, an unannounced voice note on your personal phone is synchronous. It demands immediate attention and spikes your cortisol.
Oh, I hate unexpected voice notes.
See? And if you hate voice notes, but your client is a verbal processor who loves leaving 5-minute audio monologues, your working relationship will degrade into resentment within a week if you don't audit that preference up front.
So once you've defined where and how you communicate, the next immediate trap is when, which brings us to the meeting cadence. Because an undefined meeting cadence is where calendars go to die.
Absolutely.
Are you meeting weekly, bi-weekly?
Yeah.
Are the sessions a tight 60 minutes or a sprawling 90 minutes?
And crucially, what is the prep requirement? This is where the self-audit starts shifting power dynamics. If you require a client to fill out a brief 48 hours before your call, you are training them that your shared time is highly valuable strategic time, not an unstructured brain-picking session.
Oh, that makes so much sense. From there, the audit pushes you to define scope and boundaries. What is actually included in the fee? And what is a hard no? The source specifically calls out the quick question by text as a major boundary issue.
Because the quick question rarely is. It's the most insidious form of scope creep. By auditing your boundaries, you decide in advance how you will handle those out-of-scope requests, rather than trying to figure it out while a client is actively waiting for a reply.
Now, we move from logistics into pure behavior.
Yeah.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The fourth prompt of the self-audit asks you to define your ideal client behavior. It asks you to literally write down the pet peeves you want to avoid and the habits you wish every client adopted. And I'm going to push back again, even harder this time.
Let's hear the argument.
This sounds exactly like a rock band's tour rider.
A tour ride?
Yeah. You know the famous story of Van Halen demanding a bowl of M&Ms in their dressing room, but stipulating there could be absolutely no brown M&Ms?
Yes, I know the one.
It feels incredibly arrogant. I'm terrified that if I sit down and say, well, my pet peeve is when clients ask for too many revisions, I'm going to lose the gig. Is it really justifiable for a service provider to dictate their behavioral preferences to the person holding the checkbook?
I completely understand why that feels like professional suicide. It feels like you are making demands from a place of ego. But let's look at why Tuckerman insists on this, and let's actually reframe the Van Halen story. Do you know why Van Halen actually demanded the removal of brown M&Ms?
I always thought it was just to be difficult to, prove they were rock stars.
That's the myth. The reality was that their stage setup was massive and highly dangerous. It required intense structural integrity. The brown M&M clause was buried deep in the technical contract.
Right, really?
Yeah. If the band walked into the dressing room and saw a brown M&M, they immediately knew the venue promoter hadn't read the contract closely, which meant the stage rigging might not be safe. It wasn't about ego. It was a canary in the coal mine for safety.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea. That completely changes the context.
Tuckerman's approach to client behavior is the exact same principle. Defining your pet peeves isn't about being a diva. It is about protecting the environmental conditions required to deliver the absolute best return on investment for that client.
So if my process requires uninterrupted, deep focus work to write a brilliant marketing strategy, and the client's habit is to send rapid-fire Slack messages all day expecting instant replies, my focus shatters.
Precisely. And when your focus shatters, your work suffers, which means their results suffer. By identifying your pet peeves in the self-audit, you aren't preparing a list of demands to yell at them. You are reverse engineering the conditions you need to succeed so you can communicate those needs professionally.
You are protecting their investment from their own worst habits. That makes complete sense. Which brings us to the final piece of the self-audit, defining success. You have to ask yourself, how do we actually know when we've won?
Right. What are the specific milestones?
Because if you don't know what the finish line looks like, you will just keep running forever and the client will never feel satisfied.
The self-audit is heavy lifting. It requires profound self-awareness. But once you have those answers, the translation into the real world is incredibly smooth.
Right. The final hurdle is execution. How do you take all this deep psychological introspection and present it to the client in a way that is, as Tuckerman promises, frictionless.
Which is the whole goal.
Exactly.
Oh, though.
Well, the source provides a literal fill-in-the-blank template show. It's a 5-part structure that you populate using the data from your self-audit. And looking at how these sections function is fascinating.
It is entirely built on causality. Every section serves a specific psychological purpose.
Part 1 is our shared goal. Before you list a single rule, you start with the agreed-upon objective. You are framing the entire document not as a list of restrictions, but as the roadmap to their desired transformation.
It aligns you as partners on the same side of the table, looking at the same target.
Part 2 is how we communicate. This is where you put the lane lines of the pool, primary channel, response times, and the emergency protocol.
Right.
Then Part 3 is meetings and sessions. You detail the cadence, the length, and the required prep. Again, this changes the power dynamic from a vendor showing up to perform to a consultant requiring active collaboration.
Notice how objective the language needs to be here. It removes all the emotion. Emails are answered within 24 hours. It's just a fact.
Part 4 is scope and boundaries, explicitly stating what is included, what is excluded, and how between-session support is handled. And finally, Part 5 is what success looks like. You state the measurable outcomes and establish a cadence for reviewing progress, say, looking at the metrics every 30 days to adjust if necessary.
And the delivery mechanism for this is crucial. You don't send this through a complicated legal portal. The source suggests preparing it as a clean Word document, or better yet, a fillable PDF or Google Doc.
The source highlights a specific method where you set up prompt areas, and the client simply types their name directly into the document, and it autofills the agreement. It literally takes them 10 seconds. That is the zenith of a frictionless offer.
It ensures that agreeing to your boundaries is the easiest thing they will do all day.
But wait, I'm looking at the very bottom of this template structure, and there are signature lines. Date and signature for the consultant, and date and signature for the client.
Yeah.
We established very clearly in Section 2 that this is not a legal contract. It's a clarity tool. So why are we making them sign and date it? Doesn't a signature inherently make it feel like a legal trap?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human behavioral psychology, the signature is actually the most important mechanism in the entire document.
Okay, explain the psychology of that contradiction. Why a signature if it's not a contract?
Because the signature has nothing to do with creating a legally binding, enforceable trap. It has everything to do with psychological commitment. Think about how we consume information digitally.
We skim everything.
Exactly. When we just read a document or even reply sounds good to an email, it's a passive experience. We skim, we nod, and we immediately forget the specifics. We haven't internalized the information.
We just want to get to the next task.
Yes, but the physical act of signing your name, even if it's typing a digital signature into a PDF, is an active, conscious event. It forces the brain to pause. It transforms passive reading into active agreement.
It's a psychological trigger that shifts their mindset.
Yes. It signals to the client's brain, I have acknowledged these specific boundaries. I am taking ownership of my side of this relationship. It officially closes the door on the undefined territory and transitions both of you onto solid, visible ground. It is the modern equivalent of a firm handshake, just captured on paper.
So what does this all mean? If we step back from the specific prompts and look at the entire ecosystem James Tuckerman has mapped out for us,
Right.
by utilizing a client expectations agreement, by doing the deeply introspective work of the self-audit first, and by having the courage to make your invisible boundaries highly visible, you achieve a dual victory.
You really do.
You protect your own nervous system from the burnout of scope creep,
Yeah.
and you guarantee a sharper, more focused, and ultimately better result for your client.
It completely dispels the myth that professional boundaries are barriers to success. When constructed correctly, those boundaries are the very foundation that makes success possible. You can't swim fast without the lane lines.
Which brings us right back to where we started. You do not have to suffer through a professional situationship. You don't have to dread the Friday afternoon email. You can just draw the map.
And if we take a step back, it really makes you wonder about the applications of this framework beyond just our professional lives.
Oh.
Think about it. If a simple one-page clarity tool can completely eliminate resentment, anxiety, and burnout in our high-stakes business consultant, what unspoken, invisible expectations in our personal relationships with our partners, our families, our friends, are desperately waiting to be put down on paper.
Oh, wow. A personal expectations agreement? I'm imagining sliding a fillable PDF across the kitchen table to my spouse about weekend communication protocols. I think I might need a whole separate deep dive just to prepare for the fallout of that one.
It's a powerful and maybe slightly dangerous thought to leave on.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate your curiosity, your time, and your relentless drive to learn how to operate better. Keep asking the hard questions, keep building those lane lines, and we'll catch you next time.